Okay, so now we're just talking about the planes of the body. And I have my little poster board here to help demonstrate what I'm trying to talk about. So there's three main planes. There's the frontal and coronal. Now I put both terms on the slide for you. I like to refer to it as the frontal plane, but it is also sometimes referred to as the coronal plane. I like frontal because this plane divides the body into front and back halves, and when it has frontal in the word, it sort of reminds me, oh yeah, that's the plane that there will be a front half to that one. So anyways, if you take this poster board, now imagine it being like going right straight down my head this way and slicing my body like in half and it doesn't necessarily have to be exact halves, so that's why I think I put parts on there. So it's going to have a front and a back part to it. So there's going to be a part in front of this and a part behind this. That will be the frontal and coronal plane. Now the planes are there to kind of help us understand the planes of motion, I guess. And as massage therapists, we really do need to understand how the body moves. And when a client comes in and they're like, oh, I have pain when I move my arm like this, you need to understand what muscles are involved in that movement, what kind of movement that is, and what could be hindering that. So that's why it's kind of good for us to have a basis for it. So there's the frontal and the coronal. And like I said, I like the frontal term because that has front in the word and it reminds me, oh yeah, there'll be a front part with that plane. And anyway, so like a movement that happens along the frontal plane is just this. It's called abduction. Adduction, you're going to learn those in a couple lessons down the road here. But this movement, anything like this, a leg, an arm going out to the side, they're all moving along the frontal and coronal plane, the frontal / coronal plane. Okay, so the next plane that I mentioned, I can't remember which order exactly I put them on the slide, but there is the sagittal plane. So now if this poster board's turned sideways and it kind of just is slit down my head going this way, just try to remember now there's going to be a right and a left part to this plane, right? So yeah, here's the line, here's where it's dividing my body, and so this plane has gotten very confusing even for me. Now when I first learned it, I think I learned it as the medial plane, thinking that it just automatically always went down the middle of your body. However, sagittal just means that there's going to be a left and a right part. It doesn't have to be equal, like the plane can be cut here, here, you know. This is all about like in anatomy labs when they're dissecting humans. They can take a section, like if they want to see the inside of the right lung, then they're going to divide the plane over here, or the left lung, right lung, whichever one. But they're going to divide it to get sliced through those specific organs, and then they can look from this way or that way to see the cross section or whatever section they've decided to dissect. So that's a lot of reasons too why they came up with planes and what is the dissection happening on what plane and what section is this that you take that tissue from or this. So a lot of it does have to do with medicine as well. But like I said, for us, we're more worried about the motion and how the motion goes along which planes and how that all relates to each other. So I talked about sagittal. That just means right or left parts. There's a mid-sagittal. So remember, the one that has the word mid in it, that one's going to go down the middle of the body. So that one should divide the body exactly in half. So then you'll have a right and a left half to it. So just remember, mid-sagittal will be middle. Sagittal will be parts. It doesn't have to be equal. Okay, and then for movements that might happen along the sagittal plane, flexion and extension, right? When you do bicep curls, that motion is happening along the plane. So for a motion to be considered along the plane, it can't cross that line, that boundary that we divided with our poster board. So it can't go this way because that's crossing the plane, right? But if it stays along that line and goes perpendicular to or parallel to it, then we're in that plane of motion. So we're doing flexion, extension, and we're sticking along that line of the plane. So that's in the plane of motion. The last one is the transverse section. So now if I turn this poster board to be flat and I cut through my body like right through here, that's a transverse section. It could also be called cross. which that just means I'm going to have top and bottom parts. Again, they're not equal parts. This could be happening up here, it could be up here. They can do a transverse section of just your brain, you know, and then that's still called the transverse cross section. So the rotation often happens along this plane. See, when I'm rotating like this, I'm not doing a motion that crosses this boundary right here. So I'm rotating, and that's the motion that will usually happen along this plane. So like if I were to do flexion of my hip right here, that still is going across this plane. It can't be in that plane of motion, because eventually if it keeps going up, like I'm gonna try and cross this plane of motion. But if I do this and rotate my hip out like this, that is in the transverse plane of motion, okay? So just keep that in mind. Like this is, it's gonna wanna go through here, and it can't do that. That's a boundary for it. But if I'm rotating, like doing medial and lateral rotation on my shoulder, that is moving across the plane of the transverse section that I have here. Okay, so those are the 3 planes of motion. There is almost always one question about the planes on the NCLEX exam. So, you know, it's hard to remember the planes because we don't talk about them a lot. Like after today, I'll try to bring it up when I think about it, but a lot of times massage therapists, we learn it the first day of anatomy and then we don't ever think of it again, and then it shows up on the exam and we're like, crap, I haven't talked about that in a year and a half. So just before you go in to take your exam, review the planes, try to remember them, look back over these videos periodically just to refresh your memory, okay? So those are the planes of motion. I'm also adding one other video in, hoping that maybe if you hear another YouTube video, another woman explaining it, it will sink in a little bit more, okay?